Most people who knew Elias Crane figured he'd die alone up that mountain, and figured it the way you figure on weather, not cruel about it, just certain. He was the kind of old that doesn't ask for help and won't take it when offered. No wife anymore. No kids that called. Just 40 acres of bad grass, a roof that leaked over the kitchen, and a temper he wore like a coat he'd had so long he didn't notice the weight of it. And here's the thing I keep coming back to. The night that should have killed him, the night the cold came down so hard it cracked the water trough clean through, he wasn't alone. He'd made sure of that years before on another bad night when any sensible man would have driven past. He didn't drive past. He stopped. He did the foolish thing. And the two helpless animals he carried home in the front of his coat, the two things half the valley wanted him to put down, were the only reason there was a man left to find it all. I was the one who found him. I'm going to tell you exactly how it went, because I was there for the end of it and most of the middle, and because somebody ought to. But I'll warn you now, this isn't a story about a man who got rewarded for being kind. It's messier than that. Kindness doesn't come with a receipt. Sometimes it costs you more than you can stand to lose, and the bill comes due years after you've forgotten you signed for anything. Stay with me. I promise you it's worth the cold. The first time I really understood the kind of man Elias Crane was, he was standing in my headlights at 4 in the morning with two dead-looking shapes pressed against his chest and snow in his eyebrows, and he was telling me to mind my own business. I should back up. I'm Cole. I worked the Crane place the last 6 winters, on and off, which is a thing that needs explaining because Elias didn't hire help and didn't want any. What happened was, my truck threw a rod 2 miles down from his gate one January, and I walked up his road because his was the only light, and instead of running me off he let me sleep in the tack room and never quite got around to telling me to leave. So I stayed. I fed when he wouldn't admit his hands hurt too bad to grip the bale strings. I kept a log. I've always kept logs, whether in berths and which cow was favoring which leg. It's a habit my father beat into me, and the one thing of his I'm grateful for. Elias used to say I wrote down so much I'd forget how to remember anything on my own. He was probably right. He was right about a lot of things and wrong in ways that took years to show. But I'm getting to the pups. Let me get to the pups. It was the tail end of a storm that had no business coming so late. We'd had a warm stretch. That fall spring the high country throws at you to get your hopes up, and then a front dropped over the divide like a lid coming down on a pot. I'd driven into town for feed and parts and stayed too long over coffee because the woman at the counter was easy to talk to and I was 26 and lonely. And by the time I started back the road was a white ribbon and the wipers were losing. I came around the cutbank below Elias' place doing maybe 15, and there was a figure in the middle of the road. I stood on the brakes. The truck slid, caught, stopped maybe 10 feet short of him, close enough that the headlights lit him up full. And it was Elias, of course it was Elias, who else would be on foot on that road in that, and he had his coat bundled up against his chest with both arms, holding something, and he was swaying like a man who'd been out too long. I got out yelling his name. The cold hit me like a board across the face. He looked at me, and I'll never forget this. He looked at me the way a dog looks when it's got something in its mouth it knows you're going to take away. Guilty and stubborn at once. "Get back in your truck," he said. His voice was wrecked. He'd been out for hours, I'd find out. "Mind your own business, Cole." "You're gonna die out here," I said. "What in God's name?" And then one of the shapes against his chest moved. A small dark head, eyes shut, mouth opening in a sound too thin to call a cry. And I understood that the old man had 2 animals inside his coat and had been walking them home through a blizzard because his own truck had bogged in a drift a half-mile back and he wasn't about to leave them in it. I got him in my truck. He fought me about it for about 4 seconds and then his legs went, and that was the end of the argument. I got the heater going full and pointed it at him, and he sat there shuddering with those 2 things bundled up, and in the cab light I finally saw them clear. Wolf pups, maybe 6 weeks old. One gray, one near black, both so thin their ribs showed through the wet fur, both barely moving. The gray one had a milk crust of frost on its muzzle. They looked more dead than alive. "Elias," I said, "those are wolves." "I know what they are." He didn't look at me. He was breathing on the black one, cupping his hands around its whole small body, and his hands were shaking so bad I didn't know how he kept hold. "Mother's dead, down in the culvert by the section corner. Trap." He said the word like it tasted bad. "Somebody set a trap on the federal line and she got in it and she'd been there long enough." He stopped. "Long enough that these two crawled out looking for her, and went the wrong way, and I near stepped on them coming up the road on foot after I bogged the truck." I want to tell you what I thought in that moment because I'm not proud of it. I thought, leave them. I thought, it's nature, it's hard. The man is 71 years old and half frozen, and he is going to kill himself trying to save two predators that the whole valley would rather see dead. And the kind thing, the sensible thing, would be to take them out behind the shed in the morning and make it quick. I didn't say it, but Elias was always quicker than me at reading a face. "Don't," he said quietly. "Whatever you're chewing on, don't say it." We drove the rest of the way in silence, except for the heater roaring and the thin little sounds those pups made, like air leaking out of something. Here's a thing about Elias Crane I learned slow. He had been in his life exactly as hard as people thought he was. Harder, maybe. He'd run men off his land with a rifle. He'd let a feud with his brother go on so long that the brother died down in Arizona without the two of them ever speaking again. And Elias went to the funeral and stood at the back and left before the dirt was on, and never said one word about it to anyone. And the only reason I know it happened is the postmistress told me. He was not a soft man. He did not collect strays out of some big warm heart. If you'd asked him, he'd have told you he didn't have one. So I have spent 6 years trying to understand why he stopped that night. The best I've got is this. His wife, Margaret, had died 4 years before I came. I never met her. But the house was full of her reading glasses still on the windowsill, her name on the calendar in the kitchen in a hand that wasn't Elias, a garden gone to weeds that he mowed around instead of through. And once, exactly once, late, after he'd had 2 fingers of whiskey for the cold, he told me that Margaret used to keep an orphan lamb every spring, a bummer lamb, the runt the ewe wouldn't take, and she'd bottle it on the porch and name it and cry when it went to market in the fall, every single year. And every single year he told her she was a fool for it. And every single year he built the little pen by the porch before she even asked. She'd have stopped for them, he said, that one time. He wasn't looking at me. She'd have got out of the truck. So maybe it wasn't his heart at all. Maybe it was hers still running him from 4 years in the ground. I don't know. I've decided I don't need to know. A kind thing got done. That's the part that mattered later. That first night we didn't sleep. We got the pups into the kitchen, into a box lined with one of Margaret's old wool blankets that Elias pulled out of a cedar chest without a word, and we warmed them by the oven with the door open, and we did the thing you do with hypothermic animals, which is you do not warm them too fast or their heart stops. Elias knew that. Elias knew an alarming amount about keeping small things alive, for a man who claimed not to care about any of it. The gray one came around first. About an hour in, it lifted its head and looked at the kitchen with those blue puppy eyes that hadn't turned yet, and it opened its mouth and made a real sound, a proper hungry sound, and Elias let out a breath I think he'd been holding since the culvert. The black one took longer. For a while I was sure it was gone. It had gone cold and still, and Elias had it cupped in both hands against his stomach, and he sat in the kitchen chair not moving, just holding it. And I watched an old man will an animal to live with nothing but the heat of his own body and the stubbornness that was the truest thing about him. "Come on," he said to it, not loud. "Come on now, you came this far, don't you quit on the warm part." It moved at maybe 3 in the morning, just a twitch, then a long shudder that ran the whole length of it, Then it threw up a thimble of bile and milk onto Elia's shirt and started to cry, and Elias laughed. I'd never heard him laugh, and I would barely hear it again, a short, cracked, astonished sound, and he said, "There. There you are. There's the mean one." He was right about that too. The black one was always the mean one. I'll get to him. We had no idea how to feed them, and no way to ask anybody without telling somebody. And you did not tell anybody in that valley that you had wolves in your kitchen. So Elias drove 40 miles the next morning to a farm store in a county where nobody knew him and bought goat's milk replacer and the smallest nipples they had, for lambs and a feeding syringe. And he paid cash and didn't say what it was for. I want you to picture this. A 71-year-old man with arthritis so bad in his hands that he couldn't button his own coat some mornings, sitting up every 2 hours through the night, every 2 hours, warming milk and testing it on his wrist and coaxing it into 2 animals so small they fit in one of his palms. His hands shook. He spilled. He cursed. He kept the kitchen light on so long the bulb burned out, and he climbed up on the chair himself to change it, because he wouldn't wait for me to wake up and do it. The gray one ate easy. The black one fought everything, even the milk, even the thing keeping it alive. It would clamp down on the nipple and then jerk back like it had been tricked, and Elias would have to start over, patient in a way I'd never seen in him with a human being. "Why do you let him do that to you?" I said one night, watching. My own hands were cold and I'd given up after 20 minutes. "Because he's scared," Elias said. "Scared things bite the hand that's helping. You learn that or you don't keep anything alive." I wrote that down. I write everything down, but I've thought about that one more than most. By the 3rd week their eyes had turned. The puppy blue gone to a yellow that didn't belong in a house, a yellow that made you remember every story you'd ever heard around a fire about what comes out of the timber in winter. And that's when the trouble started, the humankind, which is always worse than the cold. Because you cannot hide 2 wolves on a working ranch in a small valley forever. You just can't. The propane man saw them through the kitchen window. The propane man told his wife. His wife told the cafe. And by the time the snow started to rot in March, everybody from the divide to the river knew that crazy old Elias Crane had wolves up the cutbank. And the question on every porch was not whether somebody would do something about it, but who, and when, and whether the old man would be standing in front of them with his rifle when they came. The first one to come was Roy Peterson, who ran cattle on the section below Elias and had lost calves to wolves before, real wolves, the wild pack that worked the high country, and had every reason in the world to hate the sight of a yellow eye. Roy drove up one evening in April, and I was in the yard, and I watched Elias come out onto the porch with the gray pup at his heel. Already he wouldn't leave them in the box. Already they followed him like he was the last warm thing in the world, which I suppose he was. And the 2 old men stood there in the long light, and I thought, here it is. "Elias," Roy said. "Roy, they're saying you got wolves." "I got 2 pups whose mother died in a trap somebody said illegal on the federal line," Elias said. "You know anything about that trap, Roy?" And Roy went quiet, because everybody knew Roy ran traps he shouldn't. Everybody knew it. And Elias had just told him in front of a witness that he knew whose trap it was and what it had done, and that he had carried the consequences of it home in his coat. Roy looked at the gray pup. The gray pup looked back at him, ears up, not afraid, which is a terrible thing in a wolf, that lack of fear, because a wolf that isn't afraid of a man is a wolf with no future in a country full of men. "They get big," Roy said finally. "They get big and they remember their wolves and they go through a fence and into my calves, and then it's not your problem anymore, it's mine, and I'll handle it the way I handle it. Then I'll keep them off your calves. You're 71 years old." I'm aware of my age, Roy. I get reminded of it every morning I have to get up. Elias' voice was flat and even, but I'd been around him long enough to hear the thing underneath it, the thing that didn't bend. You set a trap that killed a mother on land that wasn't yours, and I cleaned up after you, and now you want to tell me how to do it. Drive home." Roy drove home, but I remember standing in that yard watching his taillights go down the cutbank, and feeling the cold come up out of the ground through my boots, and knowing, the way you know weather, that this wasn't over. That a kind thing done in the dark on a winter road was going to have to be paid for in daylight, in front of everybody, for as long as those two animals lived. I didn't know yet how long that would be, or what it would buy. Elias stood on the porch a while after the truck was gone. The gray pup leaned against his leg. The black one had come to the door and stopped in the threshold, the way it always did, never quite willing to come all the way into the warm or all the way back out into the dark. A creature caught between two lives, which is what they both were, which is maybe what Elias was too. "You think Roy's right?" I asked him. He didn't answer for a long time. "Probably," he said. And he went inside, and the gray one went with him, and the black one stood in the doorway looking out at the dark timber where it was born, and then it turned around and followed the old man in. I should have written down what that meant. I didn't have words for it yet. The gray one we ended up calling June, because she came alive on the longest day of that first summer, and because Elias' wife had been born in June, though it took him 3 weeks to admit that was why. The black one Elias just called the dark for the longest time, like a weather report, and then one morning after the dark had hauled a whole hunch of deer up onto the porch and left it there like rent, Elias started calling him Smoke, and Smoke he stayed. June and Smoke. I want you to hold onto those names. You're going to need them. That summer they grew the way nothing else in nature grows. You'd swear they were bigger between morning and night. By August, June stood as high as Elias' hip, and Smoke was bigger than that, all chest and shoulder and a head like a maul, and the puppy fat was gone, and the yellow eyes had settled into something that knew exactly what it was. They were beautiful in a way that hurt to look at. They were also, by any law on the books, completely illegal, and Elias knew it, and he made me drive him down to the county seat to find out exactly how illegal. This is the part people don't believe when I tell it. Elias Crane, who'd run a man off his land with a rifle, sat down across a desk from a woman from the state wildlife department and told her the whole truth. Told her about the trap, the dead mother, the culvert, the milk every 2 hours. Asked her, flat out, what the law required of him and what it would cost him to keep doing the thing he'd already decided he was going to do. And the woman, her name was Dana Whitfield, and I'll say her name with respect for the rest of my life. The woman looked at this old man across her desk and did not give him the speech. She told him the truth back, that wild wolves can't be private property. That if it became official, if it went up the chain, they'd most likely be seized, and that a seized adult wolf raised by a man, imprinted on a man, not afraid of men, that animal almost never goes to a sanctuary, because the sanctuaries are full, because there are always more than there's room for. She told him what that meant. She didn't soften it. "So if I do the right thing and report it," Elias said, "you kill them." "Most likely," she said, "yes." "And if I don't report it?" "Then I never had this conversation," Dana Whitfield said, "and I'd strongly suggest you build a fence taller than you think you need and keep them off livestock and don't let them get a taste for it, and pray every single day that they never, ever hurt a person. Because the day a wolf hurts a person, Mr. Crane, there is no story you can tell that saves it. None. Not the trap, not the mother, not the milk. None of it." She stood up. "I was never here." We drove home in silence again. We did a lot of important things in silence, Elias and me. About halfway up the cutbank he said, not to me exactly, she'd have told me to build the fence. He meant Margaret. He was checking his decision against a dead woman. I've come to think that's the truest kind of faith there is. So we built the fence. All that fall, the two of us, a 71-year-old man and a kid, dug post holes through ground that fought us every foot and strung wire 8 feet high around a 2-acre run with the timber on one side. And Elias paid for every bit of it out of money he did not have. Money he should have been spending on the roof and his own teeth, and the truck that was held together with baling wire and spite. He sold a good saddle. He sold his father's rifle, the one he'd run men off with, and I watched him hand it over to a buyer in town and not blink, and then sit in the truck for a long minute before he could start it. "You love that gun," I said. "I love the gun the way I love being right," he said. "Both of them ever did was keep people away from me." He started the truck. "Margaret used to say I'd die rich in being right and poor in everything else." He pulled out into the road. "Build the fence, Cole." I think about that drive a lot. I think it was the day Elias Crane decided what he was for. Most men never decide. They just drift to the end of it. He decided late, at 71 with frost on the windshield, that he was for these two animals and whatever it cost, and he never once went back on it, not when it got hard, and it got hard. It got hard the next spring. A calf died on the Peterson place, down by the river, killed and fed on, and Roy Peterson drove up the cutbank with two other men and stood in Elias' yard and accused him in front of God and everybody of letting his wolves kill stock. And here's the thing, June and Smoke had been in the run all night. I knew it because I'd fed them at dark and I'd checked the gate the way Elias had me check it twice every night, the latch and the chain and the second chain, and they'd been there at first light when I fed again, both of them, fat and lazy and bored. There was no way. The wire was clean. The ground inside was undisturbed. It was a wild wolf that took Roy's calf, or a lion, or a pack of dogs. The high country was full of things that kill calves and always had been, long before Elias carried two pups home in his coat. But you cannot prove a thing didn't happen. That's the cruelty of it. Roy had a dead calf and a story that fit it, and the story was old Crane's wolves. And the story was better than the truth because the truth was just bad luck, and bad luck doesn't give anybody to blame. Elias stood on the porch. He was older that spring. The fence had taken something out of him, and the winter and the worry. His hands were worse. He stood there and let Roy say his piece, all of it, and when Roy was done, Elias said, "Come look at the wire." And he walked all three of those men around the entire fence line, slow, with his bad hip, and showed them the latch and the two chains and the undisturbed ground and the lazy fat wolves who came to the wire and wagged at the strangers like the world's largest, most dangerous dogs, and he said, "These two haven't been off this ground in a week. You want to find what's killing your calves, Roy? I'll help you find it. I'll sit up with you every night till we catch it. But it's not these two, and you know it's not, and you came up here to blame me because blaming me is easier than admitting you don't know." It was the most words I ever heard Elias Crane say at one time. Roy didn't apologize. Men like Roy don't. But he looked at the clean wire and the fat wolves a long time, and something in his face came down a notch, and he said, "I'll take you up on the sitting." And the two old men, who'd been on the edge of a real fight, ended up sitting out 3 nights together in Roy's hayfield with a thermos and a spotlight. And on the third night, they shot a pair of feral dogs coming out of the brush at a heifer, 2 big mongrels somebody had dumped. And that was what had been killing Roy's calves all along. After that, Roy left Elias alone. Not friendly, they were never friendly, but he left him alone. And once, at the cafe, when a younger man started running his mouth about Crane and his wolves, Roy told him to shut up about things he didn't understand, and that was as close to a blessing as that valley had to give. I want to tell you about the night Elias almost let them go, because it's the heaviest thing he ever did and the most important to what came after, and most people, when I get to this part, don't understand it. They think keeping the wolves was the kindness. They've got it backwards. It was the second fall. June and Smoke were full grown, magnificent, restless. The run was big, but a run is a run. And there were nights, I heard it and so did Elias, that the wild pack would call from up on the divide. The real ones. The ones June and Smoke had been born to, and June and Smoke would stand at the wire with their noses up and answer. This long, aching sound that went straight through the bottom of you. And you understood that everything we'd built, the fence and the milk and the love, was a wall around something that was supposed to be running loose under the moon. And one night Elias came out to the run with a coat on over his night clothes, and I followed because I'd heard the calling too, and I found him standing at the gate with his hand on the latch. He had it open, not all the way, but the chains were off and the latch was up and his hand was on the gate, and the two wolves were standing right there, looking at him, looking at the open dark beyond him, looking back at him. "Elias," I said. "They didn't ask for the fence," he said. His voice was strange. "I keep telling myself I saved them. Maybe I just took them. Maybe the kind thing was to never get out of the truck." "They wouldn't last a week out there," I said. "Dana said it. They're not afraid of men. First man they walk up to wagging puts a bullet in them." "I know what Dana said." He didn't move his hand. "I'm not asking you what's smart, Cole. I'm asking, is it mine to keep something this big behind a wire because I can't stand to be alone in that house? Is that kindness, or is that the loneliest, greediest?" He stopped. His jaw worked. "Margaret's lambs went to market every fall. Every fall. She bawled and she let them go because keeping them would have been about her, not them. I never understood it till right now." And he opened the gate the rest of the way. I have never in my life seen anything I understood less than what happened next. June went out. June walked through that open gate into the dark and the calling and the cold, 20 feet, 30, a gray shape going where she was born to go, and then she stopped. And she turned around. And she came back. She came back through the gate and sat down at Elias' feet and leaned her whole weight against his bad leg, and the wild pack called again from the divide and she didn't even lift her head. Smoke never went out at all. Smoke stood in the open gate the way he'd stood in the doorway as a pup, half in and half out, and looked at the dark a long, long time. And then he turned around and walked back to the box elder tree where he slept and lay down and put his head on his paws, and that was his answer. They chose him. With the gate wide open and the whole wild world calling them home, they chose the old man. Elias stood there a while. Then he closed the gate slow, and I think his hands were shaking from more than the cold, and he latched it and chained it and put his hand flat on June's head, and he said, so quiet I almost missed it, all right then. I'll be worth it. I'll try to be worth it." I wrote that down too. I've read it back more times than I can count. I'll try to be worth it. He had 3 years left to make good on it. He didn't know that. Neither did I, but I think the wolves did. I think that's why they stayed. The winter that should have killed Elias Crane came 3 years after the night. He held the gate open, and the wolves chose to stay. He was 75 by then and failing in the way the strong ones fail, all at once near the end instead of slow. His heart wasn't right. He wouldn't see a doctor about it, but I'd watch him stop halfway across the yard and stand still with his hand on a fence post, breathing careful, and then go on like nothing had happened. His hands had curled up so bad he couldn't work the chains on the wolf run anymore, so that job had become mine. Twice a day, the latch and both chains, the way he'd taught me. He still went out to them every single morning and every single night. He'd sit on an overturned bucket inside the run with June's head in his lap and Smoke lying across his feet for the warmth. And he'd talk to them, low, about Margaret and the weather and nothing at all. And they'd listen the way nothing human ever listened to him. I'd taken to staying close that winter. I had a bad feeling I couldn't name. I'd quit driving to town for the woman at the counter. We'd let it go, her and me. The distance was too much and the winters too long, and I'd more or less moved into the tack room for good. And I think Elias knew I was watching him and let me, which was its own kind of admission from a man like that. The night it happened, the cold came down off the divide the way it had the night he found them, that same killing cold, the kind that cracks the trough and freezes the breath in your nose. I'd done the evening feed and chained the run. Elias had gone out after dark, against my telling him not to sit with them one more time. He did that more and more those last weeks, like he was saying goodbye to something a little at a time. I fell asleep. God help me. I fell asleep in the warm tack room with a book on my chest, and when I woke it was past midnight and the wind had come up screaming, and I knew The way you know weather, the way you know a thing in your gut before your head catches up. I knew the old man wasn't in the house. I want to tell you what I found, and I want to tell it right, because it's the whole reason there's a story. The gate to the run was open. Not broken, open. Later we worked out what had happened. Elias had gone in to sit with them, and his heart had finally done the thing it had been threatening to do, and he'd gone down right there inside the run, in the cold, in the dark, with no one to hear and the wind eating every sound. He'd fallen and he couldn't get up his hip, his heart, the cold seizing his curled-up hands, and he was lying in the snow inside a fence 8 feet high that he'd built so well nothing could get out. And the wolves got out. I don't know how. I've never known how. The chains were mine and I'd done them right. I'd swear it on anything, but a wolf that wants out bad enough. A wolf with a reason. Smoke had torn the gate half off its hinges, splintered a post I'd have told you no animal could move, and the wire was bent back where something enormous had forced through it. And there was blood on the wire, Smoke's blood, where he'd torn himself open getting out and hadn't stopped. They could have run. The gate was open and the dark was right there, and the wild pack was calling on the divide the way it had every winter of their lives. The gate Elias once held open for them was open again, torn open, and the whole free world was on the other side of it. They didn't run. I found June first because June found me. She came out of the dark at me at a dead run and I near died of fright, a wolf coming at you full out in the black. And then she spun and ran 3 steps back the way she'd come and stopped and looked at me and ran back, and I have owned dogs my whole life, and I know what an animal is telling you when it does that. Come. Now, come. I went. I ran after a wolf through snow to my knees with the wind tearing at me, and she took me straight to the run, straight through the torn gate, to the place where the old man was. Smoke was lying on top of him. That's the thing I'll see till I die. Smoke had torn himself open getting out of that fence, and then he hadn't run. He hadn't gone for help. He'd done the other thing, the only thing his body knew to do. He'd lain down full length on top of Elias' crane and put his own 140 pounds of warmth between the old man and the cold that was killing him. He'd lain there and bled and kept him warm while June went for me. And June must have gone back and forth between them for hours. There were tracks everywhere, frantic, back and forth, 2 animals doing the only 2 things they could think of, one to fetch and one to warm, all night in the worst cold of the year. Elias was alive, barely but alive. The doctors said later that another hour without the warmth would have finished him, that the only reason there was a man to bring down off that mountain was that something had kept his core temperature up through the night. They didn't say what the something was. They didn't believe me when I told them. I don't blame them. Smoke didn't make it. He'd lost too much blood on the wire and given too much warmth to the cold, and he was gone before the ambulance ever found our road, gone with his head against the old man's chest. And when they lifted Elias onto the stretcher, June would not let them near Smoke's body, would not. Stood over him with her ears flat and her teeth bare, until I knelt down in the snow and put my arms around her neck and held on while she shook. She let me hold her. A wild thing in the worst hour of her life let a man hold her. I've never been given anything like that before or since. Elias lived 2 more years. The heart attack should have killed him and the cold should have killed him, and neither one did. And he used to say, in that flat, dry way of his, that he was clearly being kept alive out of spite by a God who wasn't done laughing at him yet. But I knew better, and so did he, under the joke. He'd been kept alive because 3 years before, with a gate wide open, 2 animals had chosen him, and one of them had spent that choice all the way down to the bottom on a night he needed it spent. He buried Smoke himself, as much as I'd let him, up under the box cellar where Smoke used to sleep. He was too weak to do the digging, so I did it, and he stood over me directing it like he directed everything. And when it was done, he stood at the little mound a long time in the cold with June pressed against his leg. And he didn't cry. Elias Crane did not cry, but he took off his hat, which I'd never once seen him do for any man. I told him I'd try to be worth it, he said. He wasn't talking to me. Didn't figure on it going the other way. June stayed by him every day after that, never more than a room away, and the wild pack called all that last winter and she never once lifted her head. When Elias finally went in his sleep in the spring in his own bed, which is more than a man like him had any right to expect, she was on the floor beside the bed, and she would not leave the room, and in the end I had to carry her out and she didn't fight me. She just went limp and let me, which was worse. I buried him next to Margaret and I buried well. June lived out her own years on the place. The state never came. Dana Whitfield retired and somehow the paperwork on a certain ranch up the cut bank never quite got filed, and I've always thought that was a kindness too, a last quiet one, paid forward from a desk 40 miles away. I've still got the logbook, all 6 years of it, weather and births and which cow favored which leg, and in the back in my own hand, the things Elias said that I didn't have words for at the time. Scared things bite the hand that's helping. I'll try to be worth it. Didn't figure on it going the other way. People ask me when I tell this whether it was worth it. Whether the old man, if he'd known, the fence and the money and the saddle and his father's gun and the trouble with the valley and 3 years of worry and a wolf bled out in the snow, whether he'd have done it again. Whether he'd have got out of the truck. I don't answer that anymore. I used to. I used to say of course he would, look how it ended, look how they saved him. But that's not the truth, and Elias hated nothing worse than a thing said neat to make a person feel better. The truth is he never did it to be saved. He didn't carry 2 freezing pups home through a blizzard because someday they'd carry him. There was no day, that night on the road. There was just an old man, and the cold, and a thing his dead wife would have stopped for, and a choice nobody would have blamed him for not making.